What if I told you that you are neither depressed, nor are you anxious, nor do you have any one of the raft of ever-expanding, defined mental health issues? None of these things are true. What if I told you instead you are a cup, and your cup should have something in it, and instead it is empty, and in its emptiness, this cup that is empty feels pain? What if I told you the specific pain that you're feeling is the pain of not being a self, the pain of emptiness, the pain of disconnection and alienation from having a self? This idea might be difficult for some people, especially if they're very attached to their mental health diagnoses. They don't want to think of themselves as being a silly, empty cup. But I would suggest this is the major issue that we face in this time. We have been deliberately emptied. We have been deliberately scooped of our dignity, of our capacity to think critically, of our capacity to regulate our own emotions, of our capacity to love one another, and perhaps, most importantly, our capacity to think for ourselves. We are deliberately being carved into empty cups so that anybody can put their ideological poison inside of that cup to suit their own ends. Recently, I watched a video from the Academy of Ideas called Søren Kierkegaard and the Value of Despair. And it blew me away because I watched it the day after I'd gone through a process with myself where I decided to let myself despair, to let myself think just all the negative thoughts that I would normally put to one side because, you know, as a psychologist, as a life coach, you're not supposed to engage in negative thinking. And I let them all come. And then I slept and I woke up and I felt like a new man the next day because I'd come out of denial. Kierkegaard, like Nietzsche a half-century later, sees the human self not simply as a finished product, a kind of entity, but as a developing process. Essentially, a person is in despair if they fail to be fully a self. An awareness of the emptiness of self results in that feeling that we normally call despair. Nietzsche and Kierkegaard recognized that we needed to form a self, but that self typically needed to be formed in isolation and in quiet contemplation, in a time where it's being demanded of us that we be more connected than ever before. If we adopt this idea that we're empty cups, what's the cost of connection in this time? The cost of remaining connected and the cost of taking on other people's ideology 24/7 is an emptying of the cup. And as the cup empties, you cease to be a self. Your self shrinks. Your self becomes eradicated. Your thoughts become the thoughts of the herd. You're entrained into being a mass, conformist, commodity consumer. And that's all. You become what Kierkegaard called the mass man. Here's a little quote from Nietzsche. "I go into solitude so as not to drink out of everybody's cistern. When I am among the many, I live as the many do. And I do not think, I really think. After a time, it always seems as if they want to banish myself from myself and to rob me of my soul." Nothing is more threatening to tribal consciousness and to the level of consciousness of the mass person than an individual, a self. Those people who are full of ideology, who are empty cups, who clank loudly like empty cups, are terrified when they're in the presence of a real individual with a real, present, healthy self. It is the same in the world of the spirit. Being too busy has this result, that an individual very, very rarely is permitted to form a heart. We could say a heart or a self. On the other hand, the thinker, the poet, or the religious personality who actually has formed his heart will never be popular. Not because he is difficult, but because it demands quiet and prolonged working with oneself and intimate knowledge of oneself, as well as a certain isolation. When I was studying English literature, they taught me that the formation of all stories, the basis of every human story, every human drama, is always the individual versus the crowd. There is a struggle for individuation that is necessary in order to live an authentic life, and it is hard. It is frightening and it requires courage. The evolution of the world tends to show the absolute importance of the category of the individual apart from the crowd. But as yet, we have not come very far concretely, though it is recognized in abstracto. That explains why it still impresses people as prideful and overweening arrogance to speak of the separate individual, whereas this precisely is truly human. Each and every one is an individual. To use modern parlance, he's saying people get really triggered. They get super triggered when you start talking about being an individual because it threatens their way of being in the world. And then they'll go on the attack. Quite frankly, people don't want you to individuate. So years later, in this tradition from Kierkegaard to Nietzsche, we then have Jung, and he identified that in order for a person to fulfill their potential, to thrive in an authentic way, that they would need to overcome and integrate their shadow, the unconscious, that which they couldn't see, and then to struggle from there to individuate. So the language here presupposes that when you are born, I mean, if you think about it this way, when you're born, you're physically enmeshed with your mother, and you're physically highly dependent for survival on your family. So you are literally physically enmeshed. Then you are very much figuratively enmeshed, dependent on your survival, family, school, church, state, and so on. And then as you age, what we should do as psychologically healthy individuals is individuate. But what we're being encouraged to do in this culture is to remain in adolescence. 1 foot in individuation, 1 foot in enmeshment with the family, the culture, the market forces, the state. Why? Who benefits from that? Well, if you are individuated enough to be an adult, you can go out and work, and then you can be a consumer, and you can make choices, good consumer choices that can be controlled. But if you're still enmeshed, you're still a codependent, and you're not a fully formed self, and therefore you can be frightened, you can be bullied, you can be manipulated typically by having your pleasures taken away from you. The world that we're moving into does have 1984 style Orwellian overtones with doublethink and newspeak and the simple erasure of history, but really it's Huxley, I think, that won this round. It's pleasure that's controlling us. It's the addiction to pleasure that's controlling us, which was the Huxleyan idea in Brave New World, not the fear of pain that controls us in Orwell's 1984. The most common form of despair is in not being who you are. So if you feel sad, if you feel depressed, if you feel anxious, you should consider the possibility that it is because you're an empty cup, and that is causing you to feel feelings of despair, because you're not living the life that you were born to live. The greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. No other loss can occur so quietly. Any other loss, an arm, a leg, $5, a wife, etc., is sure to be noticed. He was writing a long time ago. Imagine seeing people today attached to their smartphones, getting 8, 9, 10, sometimes 11 hours of screen time a day, practically in a cyborg state, fully enmeshed with the smartphone, which becomes a pure indoctrination machine over time. You must switch off your smartphone. You must detach from the online world. These are all other people's ideas, and they're all soaked in ideology. Ideology is not philosophy. Ideology entrains and conditions you with what to think. It does not empower you in how to think. Spend more time on your own. Think about individuating. Think about overcoming the enmeshment from family and culture and society and tribe and becoming your own person. Take that hero's journey in the Nietzschean and Jungian sense. Go through it. It is painful and uncomfortable, but what do you win in the end? I would suggest everything.